Hello and welcome. I'm John Feinblatt, president of Everytown for Gun Safety.
I'm Shannon Watts, the founder of Moms Demand Action, the grassroots arm of Everytown.
Today we have the great pleasure of hosting Representative Karen Bass for the 8th installment of Demanding Women. Chairwoman Bass, thanks so much for joining us. It's so important to have you, particularly at this moment in our country's history.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And I just want to thank you for the work that you do, because I couldn't do the work in Congress without the work you do outside to keep us accountable.
Thank you. Thank you for those kind words. It means so much. Now, as you know, we've been talking to women leaders around the country about urgent issues like racial justice, COVID-19, police violence, and elections, all through the lens of gun violence. And so having you here today will make our conversation so much richer. You have an extraordinary and inspiring history. You joined the fight for police reform all the way back in the 70s, first as a community activist, and now 4 decades later, you're leading that fight in Congress. As chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, you helped draft and pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which our organization has thrown our full muscle behind. There's just no question this bill deals with a life or death issue. And make no mistake, when police discharge their weapons, it is gun violence, full stop. So as Everytown expands our work around police reform, we're so eager to hear more from you and to learn from you. So Shannon, why don't you take it from here? I'm going to jump on Twitter and listen to the rest from there.
Sounds good. Thank you, John. And Representative Bass, thank you so much for being here. I know our volunteers are all really looking forward to hearing from you today.
Well, thank you so much for having me again. And you know what? It just means so much that your organization, Everytown, really sees the connection between gun violence and what is going on with police. And you know what? I think this moment has been so tragic for not just our country. I mean, protests in every state, but even people around the world who witnessed such an egregious act. And although it wasn't by guns, typically when there have been excessive force by police, it has been at the hand of a gun. And so for you to join in the fight, it just makes it so much richer. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I appreciate those words. You know, you just brought up policing. And so I would love to start with talking about what's happening right now in Washington. The House has passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which you introduced, but the Senate is refusing to take it up. So can you tell us more about what exactly the bill would do, and also what message would you send to Senator McConnell?
Absolutely. And from your organization, Moms Organized, you can't think of a more powerful group than that. And that is the message that needs to go to the Senate. But let me just say, you could divide the bill in different sections. The first section is accountability. When you saw that officer murder George Floyd, if you remember, he was looking at the camera, his hand was in his pocket. He was acting with complete impunity. He didn't even mind that he was being filmed. So that's one thing, holding police accountable and ending the impunity, which essentially is you can't really sue an officer, prosecute an officer, or fire an officer. It makes it extremely difficult. And that's why incident after incident, you've seen very rarely an arrest. But even when there's been an arrest, almost never is there a conviction. So that's one part of the bill. The other part of the bill really lifts up the police in the sense of having accreditation. I mean, if you think of the fact that the person that does your hair has to be an accredited beautician or barber, but yet a police officer doesn't, which is why in some cities a chokehold is illegal and in other cities it isn't. And so having national standards, having national accreditation is another part of the bill. The third part of the bill that I would talk about is the part that provides grants to communities to re-envision public safety. And so now there's a big cry that I absolutely agree with, is that police should not have to be social workers. Police should not have to deal with drug addiction. They should not have to deal with homelessness. But what has happened over the years is that we have cut back so many resources. And so we're calling for a refunding communities and having these grants be a first step. You can get a grant for your community and you can re-envision what your community needs.
Thank you for that overview. You know, are you frustrated with the fact that Mitch McConnell is sort of just ignoring this bill right now?
Well, I'm frustrated with the fact that Mitch McConnell is ignoring over 400 bills. So, of course, this bill, absolutely, over 200 of those 400 are bipartisan bills, including this one. But I'll tell you what I'm not frustrated about and what I'm optimistic about. And that is that away from the TV cameras, there are discussions that are going on. I would not call them negotiations, but I would call them discussions with a lot of my Republican colleagues. So I have not given up hope. But please, moms demand action. The role that you can play in terms of pressuring the Senate is just invaluable. We can't get this work done without your involvement.
Congresswoman, you know, police violence and COVID-19 both disproportionately impact Black people in America. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as the role that systemic racism plays in this unjust burden?
Sure. And, you know, one thing that I recommend for everyone is on Netflix, there is a documentary called 13, and it is talking about the 13th Amendment. It's very important to watch because the 13th Amendment is the amendment that abolished slavery. But there was a catch in there. And that catch in there was if you have been convicted of a crime. And so it's important to look at policing in our country from a historical perspective. And I'm sad to say that from an African-American perspective, this has been an issue for hundreds of years. Police played a key role when African-Americans were routinely lynched. But I will tell you that it is not just Black people that has suffered under this. It is also Latinos, it is Asians, it is Native Americans. And so, of course, disproportionately, it has been Black. But if you look at it, it is a part of, it is an example, a manifestation of systemic racism. But you can pretty much look at just about any institution in society and see structural, administrative discrimination that is built into some of these systems. Some of the built-in discrimination was from years ago that has never really been addressed.
And as we know, it's not just gun violence, it's also the coronavirus crisis that's impacting that. And before you ran for Congress, you worked as a healthcare professional. And you were even in trauma wards. So how does your medical background guide your response to these joint epidemics of both COVID-19 and our ongoing gun violence crisis?
It means everything. I mean, I worked in Los Angeles County's trauma center, as you mentioned, which is one of the largest trauma centers in the country. I saw gun violence every single day, every single day. I saw gun violence that came into the emergency room, and our emergency room was so massive. We took care of a lot of the victims that in an ordinary, regular emergency room would not be handled in an emergency room. It would be handled in an operating room. We had to do a lot of that in our emergency room. So I dealt with it every day. And I will tell you that although I enjoyed, and that's a weird thing to say, but I liked working in the emergency room, I was often frustrated because I really wanted to address the reasons why people were in the emergency room to begin with, which leads you to policy. Why do we have more guns in this country than any place in the world?
That's a very important question that I know you're working hard to address. And, you know, there are a lot of families right now, and many parents watching us have this conversation, they're struggling. And there's really no end in sight for them. And so what is your advice for parents who are trying to balance work and keep their kids busy and really keep their families safe from both coronavirus and from gun violence?
You know, I mean, this is such a tragedy that's happening right now. Every day, multiple times a day, I find myself referencing the fact that in 4 months, over 134,000 Americans have died in 4 months because of the virus. And it didn't need to happen. I mean, we have 330 million people in the United States. The nation of India has 1.6 billion. We have lost over 130,000 Americans. They've lost 25,000 Indians. There's just no excuse. It's the fact that we do not have leadership, or rather, we have leadership that has been in denial from day one regarding the severity of the violence, of the virus. There is no national strategy, and all of that just hurts my heart. And of course, both of these problems, all of these problems, disproportionately impact the African American population and other communities of color.
Congresswoman, we've talked a lot about your broad experience and really your remarkable background. In fact, when you were first elected to the California Assembly, you were the only Black woman serving in that legislative body. And then 4 years later, you were elected Speaker of the Assembly, and that made you the first Black woman in U.S. history to serve as the Speaker of a state legislature. And now you are the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. It has 55 members, more than ever before. What have all of these groundbreaking experiences taught you about the importance of representation in government?
Well, it just shows me the responsibility that I carry, but what an honor it is. I have devoted my entire life to fighting for justice. And as a woman, I have the double honor and responsibility to be a role model for those women and girls that are coming behind me. And that's one of the tasks that I feel the most rewarded by, is to make sure that I'm there for the next generation and make sure that I can pass the baton on to the next group.
That's right. It's a relay race. Thank you for running it.
It's a relay race.
Congresswoman, we are going to bring in a video question for you, if you don't mind, from Marco
Sure.
Vargas. He's a Students Demand Action Advisory Board member. He's in South Central Los Angeles. And he's currently a student at Dartmouth. So he's a pretty impressive guy.
Wow.
And he also created a summer organizing program for Students Demand Action volunteers in his own hometown. So here's a question for you from Marco.
Hello, Congresswoman. Like many of us tuning in today, I know that you were a community activist first. Before running for Congress, you created Community Coalition, a community-based social justice organization in Los Angeles that empowers residents to become involved in making a difference. What did you learn from that experience, and how has your time as a community organizer helped you be successful in Congress? Thank you.
Okay, well, first of all, Marco, when you graduate, I need to hear from you. I hope you're coming back to LA because I think you're one of my constituents. So study hard, do well. Working in Community Coalition and being involved in grassroots organizing at the height of the crack cocaine and gang violence crisis, which is when we saw guns on the street that were more powerful than the weapons carried by the police, taught me everything in terms of working in Congress. The Community Coalition is just that, a coalition. It's an African American and Latino organization, and those coalition building skills is exactly what you need in a legislative body, because no individual passes legislation. To pass legislation in Congress, I need at a minimum 218 votes. And so my time in doing community organizing, I apply those skills every day in Congress. And congratulations for what you're doing right now.
Yes, thank you, Marco. You are amazing. And thank you, Representative Bass, for your answer. If it's okay, I'd like to pivot to the elections that are coming up. And I'm wondering, how do you think Vice President Biden should be talking about gun safety as we lead up to Election Day?
Well, I think Vice President Biden should be lifting it to be one of the most important issues, and I believe he's already doing that. But in a lot of cities now, we're having a spike in gun violence right now. I believe just over the weekend, a child was killed in New York. There's been an uptick of shootings in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York. And so I believe that we need to get on top of it right now. And part of the solution, absolutely, are decent gun laws. I mean, we passed universal background checks out of the House. It's one of those 400 bills languishing in the Senate, Mitch McConnell. But so there's legislation around gun reform, but there's also legislation around dealing with some of the root causes of violence in communities. And I believe we know how to solve the problem. The problem in our country is that we just never make a sustained commitment to address these problems. A crisis happens, we throw a few dollars at a situation. If things get better, we say things get better. You no longer need the money, which is the exact opposite. And so I think that we just really need the strong commitment, number one, to get guns off the street. And then number two, to deal with some of the underlying social and economic drivers of gun violence.
It's incredibly important. I'd like to close with a question for you about volunteerism. You've talked a lot about organizing and how important that is, especially to get some of the bills through that you're championing. So,
Yeah.
Moms Demand Action, Students Demand Action, our volunteers have been fighting really tirelessly for gun safety and winning. And so I just wanted to know if you have a message for them.
I do. And this is not a happy message. But, I believe that my colleagues across the aisle in the Republican Party, I believe their party has been taken over by an extremist element. And unfortunately, I don't believe they're ever really going to pass the legislation. And until their party is returned back to the majority of Republicans, we really have to make sure that we take the Senate back. There's just no alternative. We've already passed the legislation out of the House. But as long as the Senate is under the leadership of Mitch McConnell, that legislation will never go anywhere. There are vulnerable senators up now. And so I hope that Moms Demand Action, Students Demand Action, you focus on those vulnerable senators. And we have to make sure they get new jobs next January until they decide that they are going to represent the majority of their people and not the NRA, which really just represents the gun industry, because nobody knows better than Moms and Student Demand Action that even the majority of NRA members believe in background checks, but the industry does not. So thank you so much for your work. I just can't get done anything in the House of Representatives without organizations like yours. Thank you.
No, thank you. And we are here to help you. And we're so glad you're in our corner, and you're exactly right. The vast majority of Americans support stronger gun laws. So we're with you all the way. And thank you so much for joining us today. We're really grateful.
Appreciate you.
And thanks to everyone who joined us today on Twitter and Facebook. Please stay tuned for more. Follow us at Everytown and at Moms Demand, and you'll get more information on the next Demanding Women conversation. If you'd like to join us in this fight, get involved with Everytown, Moms Demand Action, and Students Demand Action by texting the word READY to 64433. Again, that's the word READY to 64433. As always, stay safe, and please remember, nothing is more productive, persuasive, or powerful than demanding women.